The next one, blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. Now, whenever we let go of something we love, good, bad, or indifferent, there's a period of mourning. There's a hole in our heart for a while. But if we accept that pain of loss, then it heals in such a way that we either enter into a new relationship with what we lost that is better than the one we had, or we learn how to live without something that was actually harmful, that was really a straitjacket, that was really phony happiness. The third beatitude, blessed are the meek, that is, those who don't want to have power over other people, who couldn't care less if they're insulted or mistreated because they know that that's not their problem. That's the problem the other guy has who's treating them that way. So the meek are those who can put up with insults and find happiness in the freedom from wanting to control or to have power over people. And the other beatitudes correspond to the higher stages of consciousness, all the way up to divine union and the beatitude of the peacemakers. Now, the beatitude of the merciful and the beatitude of hunger and thirsting for justice is addressed to this level of consciousness, to full personhood and its corresponding acceptance of our own personal response to Christ, to life, and to the needs of others. So the gospel then is a message that challenges our programs for happiness head on and invites us to change them. If we hear that message and follow it, this is represented as wisdom. If we don't, then we have to rely on the tragedies of life to turn us around and finally convince us, as we wind up on the barroom floor or some other place, that our program for happiness was not so hot after all. Why wait until you have to be clobbered by life before getting this message? It's as obvious as the nose on your face that this can't possibly work. Not only that, it is destroying our relationships with other people. It's making us miserable and hindering the good that we could be doing other people. Because as long as we're wrapped up in obtaining the happiness that these emotional centers, energy centers, are seeking, you can't even hear what other people are saying, because their melodrama has to be filtered by yours. And so they tell you something, your emotions start reacting, and pretty soon you're more involved in their melodrama than they are, maybe. I don't know how it goes. But anyway, we don't hear the clear call for help that somebody has when we don't have the freedom from our own emotional selfish programs, which are begging for other people to give us their little handout to feed into this pathology. And this is real pathology. It's a distortion of human nature, a caricature of human nature, a turning of this immense potentiality for human growth and creativity into a confined straitjacket which resists growth. And hence, to live out of these centers is to opt out of God's process of human development into higher states of faith, love, and consciousness. And hence that is really the great sin of against the Spirit, to refuse to continue to grow. Let me just live peacefully with my own little nest, which God help you if you disturb, and I'll let other people go their way. This is the same statement of Cain when he was confronted by God after murdering his brother. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are, because you killed yourself in killing your brother, because the true self of everyone is the same, Christ at the deepest level. And so any violence really is an attack on God himself. And war is simply trying to tear God limb from limb, so to speak. It's the ultimate rejection of life. And it's absolutely unjustifiable on the level of rational consciousness. It's a mythical membership invention designed to defend our false self-system, even if it means blowing up the rest of the world. At least my system will be the last flicker of life as the planet disappears into dust. Well, Jesus' message is incredibly strong at this. Maybe you wonder why he speaks so harshly at times. What do you think he means when he says, if your eye scandalizes you, pull it out. If your foot or hand is a source of scandal, meaning of sin or of disregarding the needs and rights of others and your own true needs, then just take a knife, cut it right off. Well, he certainly doesn't mean that literally. In the Hebrew text, the Hebrew language, its genius is its concreteness, and it expresses hyperbole by the exaggeration of the terms in which it expresses a truth. And Jesus, coming out of that culture and speaking to people so enculturated, naturally uses that in his preaching as his device. When he wants to speak strongly, he says, I tell you solemnly. Or he puts it so strongly that you nearly drop dead from the blast of his wisdom. But remember this, that Jesus is above all a wisdom teacher, and hence his sayings are speaking about experience much more than they are about morality as a kind of series of laws to which you conform. Remember that conformity morality belongs to the mythic level, and it's the price that we pay in order to belong and to be accepted and approved by the group. And this group pressure is enormous, so that nobody wants to go against the general feeling or consensus of the group. Jim Fowler has studied the level of moral development, and he describes it in his book, of Christian communities around the country. And he observed that the community raises people to a certain level of moral respectability. But if someone wants to go beyond that, like to be more generous in serving the poor, or to create certain things that might be a little inconvenient for suburbia, then there's a real resistance takes place, a subtle pressure not to exceed the moral level or the generosity of the group as a whole. Why? Because the group has settled down for a comfortable kind of morality, a respectability and a conformity. And this guy who wants to be a real disciple of Christ and give him his life is a real embarrassment. And it might be nice if he would go to some other parish. Okay? If he doesn't, well then the word goes around, he's strange, he's cuckoo, and don't hang out with him, and he's not one of us, and he's rocking our boat, and he's not loyal to us, he doesn't appreciate all we've done for him. All these human justifications to do what? To maintain the security that we find in the group acceptance. So when Jesus says, cut your foot off if it scandalizes you, he means dismantle your emotional programs for happiness, even if it's as painful or as close to you as your hand or foot or eye. In other words, work at this stuff. If you know you've got a security center around which your life is revolving, manifested by the fact that you get terribly angry and upset whenever your emotional program is frustrated, cut it out, cut it off, get free of it. You're killing yourself and other people. You're destroying your potential for growth, the contribution you could make to your group and to the whole world, because it's people who have reached the freedom of the gospel, the freedom to take full responsibility for their decisions, activity, behavior, and other. These are the people that are pouring divine light and life into the world, even if they're only a bag lady. And they have a better chance because they're not hung up on clothes, shoes, they don't have any. So you got nothing to lose. So hence how happy you are, you got nothing to lose. Because you learn that way that God knows how to take care of you. He takes care of the birds. And the message of Jesus is radical in approaching the problem exactly where it is. Selfishness, self-centeredness, with its inevitable programs to preserve its symbols that enable it to feel secure, esteemed, and in control. In control. In death, there's no control. If you give up the power struggle now, there's no hazard to death, there's no danger in death, unless it's a little physically painful. It's just the door into another higher state of consciousness. Death is frightening to people who are hanging on to the false self. Hence Jesus says, if you want to save your life, the false self, you will lose it. If you lose this phony life for my sake, you will find true life. This is the dichotomy of the false self and the true self that you see everywhere in the gospel. And notice the harshness of Jesus is simply a wisdom saying to shake us up, to realize, look, if you really are hung up, or you've really got to be secure to feel happy, you've got to cut that out of yourself, even if it's as painful as cutting off your foot. That's what he's saying. Okay, now he has a few words about these people at the mythical membership level. What do you think he means when he says, unless you hate your father and mother and sister and brother or children and property and your own life itself, you cannot be my disciple. Okay. What does that mean? Does that mean we should forget about our parents? Well, some people, you know, in the time of the Pharisees, used their contributions they made to the temple to justify not supporting their old folks in their old age financially. And Jesus condemns that with terrific force. So he doesn't mean not to love or take care of our parents. What does he mean? He means disidentify with anybody, including those you most love, if they stand in the way of following the gospel, of freeing yourself from these hang-ups, or of locking you into a conformity morality that prevents you from following the creativity of the gospel and creating new ministries and ministering wherever it's needed, whether the people like it or not. Now this is so important, it seems to me, to grasp the force. It doesn't mean that we hate our parents, but life itself changes our relation. We start out utterly dependent on them, and we, as we grow to be adults, we change our relationship, and it turns into a relationship of equality. We don't reject them, but there's a new relationship. But the old relationship has died of dependency. And then when they get old, they depend on us. So in that sense, all that is happening is that we grow, our relations have to change appropriately. No matter, and this involves our relationship to ourselves, God, and other people, and especially our parents. But you see, we have absorbed at this period of 4 to 7 the values of the parents, so that their ideas of morality have gotten stuck in us, and these may or may not be the result of a genuine conscience. They may have, take for instance, if you live in a place like Northern Ireland, where the children are inculcated with a hatred of the Protestants or a hatred of the Catholics. Now the child interiorizes that in good faith, and he grows up with the same hatred that his mother, grandparent, great-parent, so it goes on forever, because the child accepts unquestioningly the values of the parents who say these Protestants are no good, or these Catholics are worse than scum, or whatever it is. Now he falls in love with the Protestant girl. Imagine the guilt feelings that now go off. He's going to betray his religion, his family, and so on. He isn't. This is what we mean by the superego. It's that It's the unquestioning emotional value judgment as to what is right and wrong. It is not the judgment of reason, which is what a true conscience is. So much of life and adolescence consists in getting rid of the effects of the superego, which also appear in these other areas. National ethos and the way that our religion was transmitted to us. So if you were taught that it's a sin to eat without washing your hands, then the chances are good you spend the rest of your life feeling guilty if you don't wash your hands. And so this is simply the way things go. Now, this is a kind of straitjacket. So every kind of unreal, oppressive or repressive kind of attitude that we picked up in childhood is meant to be released, relaxed, unloaded, put it in the wastebasket as you become an adult. And the appeal to your own experience, recall the undertow of guilt feelings when you try to break out of the parental mentality or a religious instruction that was rather naive. Okay. So when you start to grow up, then the guilt feelings pile up. But these are neurotic guilt feelings. True guilt, is there is such a thing, is the realization that we have gone against our conscious conscience. That is to say, that we have done something that is against our principles as a human person, our rational life. Now, when you know that and regret it, the guilt feeling is very helpful because it tells you, brother, you have gone against your principles. You feel bad. Now, as soon as that happens and you regret it, you say, my God, I'm sorry. If you've done something to trample on the needs of others, I'll make restitution. Then you forget it. Any guilt that lasts more than half a minute is neurotic. It really is. Pervasive, prolonged, paralyzing guilt, that's the superego. That's our emotional judgment of what is right and wrong, and that's not a true judgment. That's not conscience. Conscience is a judgment of reason, not of emotion. Emotion says, damn you, you're guilty, look what you've done. You're no good. And it usually registers a pervasive negativity. So that not only have you done wrong in this issue, but particularly wrong, you're just totally worthless. That's guilt, how it works. And that's this stuff, when we don't measure up in our own judgment, then pride, neurotic pride, brings the verdict of guilty. And we think God is saying you're guilty. He certainly isn't. He's saying, you poor fool. There's nothing wrong with you. Everybody makes mistakes. For God's sake, forget it. That's what he's feeling. I forgive you. Why don't you forgive yourself, for heaven's sake? This is God. God is not vindictive. And yet, because of the childhood fear of the dark, the unknown, the boogeyman, or whatever, we easily project onto God or inject into our emotional life judgments about him that are really projections of these levels of consciousness. And this is, somebody should make a study of religion from the point of view of the levels of consciousness and how each level projects on God its own limitations. At this level, God, of course, was polytheistic because there were many forces of nature and they worshipped them all. Monotheism just began to dawn in this period. There's a ray of it in one of the pharaohs of Egypt, and then it develops powerfully in the Hebrew religion. That's their great gift. But it also appears, of course, in other forms, in other world religions. But it actually is a relationship that is the result of reason at work. But because we haven't fully entered into the level of rationality, because we're under the influence of this stuff, emotionally, our attitude to God is constantly being solicited to regress to these formal levels of relating, which are infantile, okay, or childish, unworthy of God. And so God becomes, we project on God the models of authority that we see around us. If we have a horrible father, then the God becomes horrible to our emotions. If we think of God as a policeman or as a tyrant, this is because we're projecting models in our childhood environment that are very painful to us, and since we don't know God directly, the closest thing are the authority figures that we do know. And if these are horrendous, then it's very difficult later in life to relate to God as God is in himself, until we lay aside and process our emotional junk, which also enables us to reevaluate what we think of God. Here's a good question for you to take home sometime and mull over. What is your attitude towards God at the deepest level? What do you think of this God? How do you feel towards this God? You usually find out in a crisis. Then you know whether you trust him or whether you don't know him at all, or whether you're using him as a security blanket or something else. What is your attitude? I can answer it for you in a certain sense. Your attitude could be any one of these, come from any one of those energy centers. It could also be mingled with grace and sound theology. But remember that whatever idea we picked up of God at a pre-rational level had emotional overtones, and those emotional overtones remain in the memory bank, the nervous system and brain, as a kind of parasite idea, so that whenever we think of God, that emotional wound or distortion or the fear we had of God because of the way he was presented to us in early childhood, in some cases is horrendous, it begins to go off. And so we find it difficult to emotionally put our trust in. So you could be the greatest theologian on earth and have all the right answers and emotionally be deeply wounded because of childhood experiences that won't let go. And so whenever you try to relate to God outside of the concepts of this fear or this distortion of God as a tyrant, policeman, or judge about to bring the verdict of guilty, which is really the superego's judgment, descends upon one, and one can't relax. If you're going to do centering prayer, you've got to trust God, because this is just sheer surrender. And if he doesn't pick you up or catch you, you're in tough shape. So the centering prayer challenges us, if we can't find interior rest, to find out why not. And this brings us to the kind of self-knowledge that is practical, and it may be helpful to get psychotherapy to begin to see how we're treating God on the basis of our early emotional life. Here's a little story that might bring this home, what I'm trying to say. And this is a true story, and it concerns a cardinal of the church, no less. And I feel, since it was reported in the press, that it's fair to repeat it here. And that is that when he was giving Cardinal Hume lectures to the bishops, a kind of retreat at Collegeville some years ago, he shared with them this story. He said when he was a youngster from a very strict Catholic home, and the English can be strict, his mother insisted that the children not eat between meals. And that was part of their discipline, their religious discipline. And so she had a cookie jar in the kitchen. So one day she gathered the family and she said to them, "Now I don't want any of you boys or girls to put your hand in that cookie jar in between meals. It's for dessert. And here's the sanction she gave them, because God is always watching you." Okay. So here's a sensitive child whose love of God is just developing. Now, through the somewhat ill-advised, but no doubt good-intentioned offices of his mother who's trying to train him, he now perceives God as watching him to catch him in a fault in disobedience. And this, of course, with his tender conscience, sensitive child, are the most easy to wound in this regard. He decides he'll never put his hand in the jar. Keep the rule. Whose rule, for God's sake? It was her. She didn't have enough guts to take responsibility for her own sanctions. There are only 10 commandments. If you dare to add another one, take responsibility. Don't blame God for it, for goodness sake. Well, anyway, he accepted this thing and took it seriously, and a little later he entered the Benedictine order, where there are all kinds of rules. And I suppose he was keeping them for the same reason. God is always watching. God have mercy on my soul for judging anyone, but maybe he entered the monastery for that very reason. Safer there, so that now there'll be less opportunity for God to be displeased with him. He apparently had been thoroughly terrorized by that situation. Now some of this is my interpretation, please. If he sues me for libel, I'll realize that I overdid it. But anyway, he said, not I, to the bishops, for many years, that was my relationship to God. But one day, something happened. He didn't say what it was. I had an experience of God, and I suddenly realized, and I've realized it ever since, that if as a child I had put my hand in the cookie jar in between meals, and if God was truly watching and concerned about that situation, he would have said, Sonny, why don't you take another one? Okay. Now that is the God of the Christians. This other God is no God. It doesn't exist. It's a distortion, a caricature, an insult. What God takes from human beings is you wouldn't treat a dog the way people treat God or think about God. It's disgusting. Only God would put up with it, because we treat him from these incredibly primitive levels, which are so far removed from the God of love and the source of the universe that it's just pathetic. Pathetic. Okay. Well, here is someone who was on the way to trusting God in a relationship, and through the ill and poorly psychological presentation of some aspect of discipline, she, without intending to, retarded that young man's union with God for maybe 20, 30 years. That's how fragile the human situation is. I wonder if that isn't what, if God ever gets angry, I'll bet those are the things that make him angry. Not that people break a few rules, but to destroy the budding relationship of a child with his heavenly Father. God help you if you do that. And it's done all the time, in the name of religion. And that's why religion better get busy and study a little psychology and find out how you teach a child about mysteries and how to develop its real relationship to God through storytelling. Notice that's what the child is interested in, stories. And that's how it develops a symbolism about God that is much richer and much fuller than to drop a series of laws and do's and don'ts on it before its emotional life is able to handle that stuff. The emotional life will be damaged by motives of fear. And the child is terribly vulnerable on that level. So when Jesus said, he doesn't mean not to love them. He means disidentify with their value system if it's not according to the gospel and according to human growth into the divine life. Just love them in every other regard, but when they want you to do what they want to do, you say, I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, I've got some other values going. See you later. And the same thing goes for all the other groups. Your peer group, sorry boys, I can't see you anymore in the old tavern. I'm going to the ice cream parlor. I'm going to church. I'm going to join the Trappists. the fastest way to lose your friends is to change your way of life, because they're threatened by that. And so it's a lonely road sometimes when you take the spiritual journey for a while. But a little while, God will give you the most remarkable friend that you never dreamed existed in this world. And so he never takes anything from us except to give you something better. You cannot overdo trust in this God. He's infinitely compassionate, so, and powerful, which means he can do something about it. So what this means is, if your family, nation, group, anybody stands in the way of your true growth, which is in the interest of the whole human family, then you have to know how to say politely no, and stick by the courage of your God-given attraction. And this, so that you can see that the gospel is calling us everywhere, out of this straitjacket, out of over-identification with group, which is not to say anything is bad, but we've got to learn the right use of everything. And this is true ascesis, to integrate each level of consciousness into our ongoing human growth. Not to reject it, but not to absolutize it and get fixated in it.